Our next item is an appeal hearing regarding the decision of the City Planning Commission to approve a conditional use permit to allow emergency shelter at 1801 Nicollet Avenue. I'll ask Lindy from CBIT Department to give us that presentation.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Lindsay Silas. I'm a senior city planner with CPED Land Use Design and Preservation. The project before you today is a proposed emergency shelter at 1801 Nicollet Avenue. This site consists of two parcels. 1801 Nicollet contains a 3-story commercial building with a medical clinic on the first floor and a portion of a surface parking lot. 1800 First Avenue South is a surface parking lot. The building is located at the northwest corner of the intersection of Nicollet Ave and 18th, located in between Nicollet and First. The applicant is proposing to establish a recuperative care facility. If you will recall from the last BIZ meeting, this is the second one that we have seen at this committee in recent meetings. This proposal is for a 64-bed emergency shelter recuperative care facility that would occupy the second and third floors of the existing building. So the City Planning Commission approved the conditional use permit for an emergency shelter for 64 people at its meeting on August 12th, and an appeal was filed on August 22nd by Jacob Saufley on behalf of Sentinel Management and YellowTree Corporation regarding the Planning Commission's decision to approve that conditional use permit. I won't go too far into this on this presentation since we did cover this at the last meeting with regards to the other facility, but again, this is a recuperative care facility, which is a new license type by DHS. These facilities provide short-term housing to people who have been who need a place to stay after medical illness or procedures. The goal of this type of license is to prevent hospitalizations. This license type requires 24/7 staffing and being overseen by an advanced medical practitioner, and the duration of stay per the license is approximately 60 days, with the facility helping clients find more permanent housing before discharge. Because we don't have a clear recuperative care facility use type in the zoning code, this has been determined to be an emergency shelter. Emergency shelters are conditional uses in every zoning code in the city of Minneapolis except for transportation districts. And these uses, this use type covers any sort of temporary housing for folks where people stay between 24 hours and 6 months. And again, conditional uses are those uses that allow the city to have some additional oversight and review of the use before approval. But as long as the findings for the conditional use permit are met, those conditional use permits are approved unless there are clear documented harms of the use. And again, this is in your quasi-judicial authority where there was a policy decision to allow emergency shelters citywide in almost every single zoning district in the city. So I have some photos here. This is showing the location of the site and the existing building and the layout of the site. Here is the second floor with the proposed improvements and the third floor with the proposed improvements. Staff did hold a meeting with the applicant and other city staff from Fire Inspection Services, Building Code, and the Health Department to review all applicable building and fire codes and licensing regulations that would apply to this proposed use. There were a few issues flagged on the floor plan by building and fire inspections, just with regards to the length of hallways and means of egress, things that the applicant seemed confident at the time that they could make small revisions prior to the building permit being obtained in order to comply. Staff was able to make all 6 legal findings that the proposed use is not going to have a negative impact on the surrounding area, and you can find those in the staff report. There's a few photos here as well. Staff did recommend a condition that the applicant provide landscaping and screening along this corner where there's a lot of parking lot frontage. Currently, there's just an open decorative fence. Staff has recommended a condition that the applicant provide evergreen shrubs in order to better screen that from the public street as required by the zoning code. And staff's recommendation is that the committee deny the appeal, and which would then uphold the approval of the conditional use permit. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation. We're going to have the questions at the end after the public hearing. And now I'm going to proceed the public hearing. I will first allow the applicant 5 minutes to address the committee. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, council, committee members, staff. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Jacob Saufley. I'm with Larkin Hoffman. I've got Brian Walters with YellowTree here. He's going to kick it off with a little testimony.
Can you display the screen there? Hi, Brian Walters here with YellowTree. A couple points I want to hit on. Per the 2040 plan, we should not be concentrating homeless individuals and services into our most vulnerable neighborhoods. If you take a look at the map, you'll see within a 2-block radius there are multiple homeless services being provided in this area, which is why we have such a high concentration of homeless people already in this area. This business does not serve the current homeless population. It only adds to it by bringing people from hospitals to this location. We need a city policy that will provide guidance as to where these business types should go. If we don't have it, they'll continue to go in our poorest neighborhoods where the rent is the cheapest, or as the applicant said, a business decision. This will continue to affect predominantly the BIPOC neighborhoods, and the BIPOC businesses will be affected the most, particularly by this application. All of these businesses, which I could only find one that is not a BIPOC-owned businesses, on this corridor. The conditional use permit requirement 2 states that the conditional use will not be detrimental to the orderly development of the area. We are developers. Multiple developers have stated we will not be able to invest in areas where there are a large concentration of homeless people. We are currently trying to negotiate a grocery store lease directly across the street from this, and they're waiting to see how this is going. Would you invest hundreds of thousands of dollars into a new business venture next to a new homeless shelter that's opening up? Residents at our apartments consistently cite homeless issues such as break-ins, thefts, drug use, and sales as to why they are leaving our apartment buildings and why it's detrimental to their lives. Nicollet Corridor is vital to the city. See how much work's being put into Lake and Nicollet right now, and it needs to be protected from uses that discourage development. The application does not meet this requirement.
Okay, and I'll pick up and add some new information that wasn't presented earlier in the application materials, but I was able to find that these recuperative care facilities exist in other states, and by nature, they take patients in and they discharge patients. What we see from the studies that I was able to find is that a very well-run facility still discharges 25 to 40% of its patients back into homelessness. That means that if we have a 64-bed facility with an average stay of 28 days, we're conservatively looking at 200 to 330 homeless people being discharged on the streets in Stevens, Whittier, Loring Heights, right out the front door. And we don't have the services to support that community here. It's already overburdened by the homeless population. We also know that mental illness and substance abuse are far more prevalent in the homeless population. This is one of the few areas in the city where the MPD is identified as a drug use hotspot. We're putting patients that have vulnerabilities into this area. Brian didn't touch on it, but this is a goods and services corridor. And that's meant to facilitate neighborhood businesses that connect the community to the resources that they need. He did talk about the expansion of Nicollet through Lake Street, and eliminating the ability to develop this corridor into a meaningful commercial space is going to be a big setback for the community. I also want to touch on the idea that the applicant didn't meet the criteria with regard to integration with the right-of-way. Nicollet Avenue is a bus stop, so I don't know how many pickup and drop-offs they plan to have in front of the bus stop, but that's not an adequate space for it. 18th is metered parking. That's also not an adequate space for pickup and drop-off. Every person coming to and from this facility is either arriving by foot or by bus or by medical transport, and given that it's a referral-based population, they're probably all arriving from transport. The applicant hasn't given us any information about how these people arrive or how they'll depart. The parking lot area on the front side off Nicollet doesn't appear to have adequate space for turning, or if she even has access to use that parking space. parking lot in the back appears to be gate controlled. It's unclear whether or not transportation services can even access that site. There's no indication about how emergency vehicles will disrupt the neighborhood with pickup and drop-off. We also know that, according to the studies I submitted, that homeless people are 6 times more likely to suffer opioid abuse overdoses. So that is going to burden the emergency response in the neighborhood, then has to deal with that issue. In short, I think we also look at this agenda and we see 2 different items that are for the same use that are following 2 very different paths to approval or denial. At the very least, you should force this applicant to undergo the IUP process and consider the same temporary use conditions for a brand new use that the city is just learning how to wrap its hands around and understand what the negative impacts actually will be in this community, because there's an enormous discharge of homelessness in other recuperative care centers throughout the country.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And now next I will call the applicant to address the committee. You have 5 minutes. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Councilman, and my name is Connie Melchizedek. I am the director of Accord Health, the company that's assuming the building, supposedly. And here I have Bob Kaufman with me. He will be responding to the appeal.
Thank you. My name is Bob Kaufman. An appeal has been made on behalf that recuperative care facility would be harmful to the community and does not meet the 5 findings of fact for conditional use. The reasons presented are based on false misconceptions, misdirection, misinformation, and fearful speculation that do not stand the scrutiny of close review. I did have a handout if you can all follow along with this at the same time. False misconceptions. There was a misconception of what this facility is. Unfortunately, the zoning ordinance categorizes this as an emergency shelter. This immediately brings up the wrong perception of its actual use. Saying emergency shelter to a neighborhood is like yelling fire in a movie theater. The uninformed, fearful response is not in my backyard. This is not an emergency homeless shelter. This is not an emergency. Recuperative care services are for referred individuals already in the care system that need continued care. This is not a shelter. We do not take in people every night to get out of the cold, only to be released in the morning to the streets during the day. This is not residential temporary homeless housing. This is not high-density housing facility as claimed by the appellant. This is not a drug treatment center. This is an institutional inpatient healthcare facility providing recuperative care services to vulnerable members of our community. There would be no qualms if this had a big name like Abbott Northwestern Recuperative Services or Hennepin County's Behavioral Health and Substance Use attached to it. But there's a reason. The appeal level even admits in the closing paragraph that the proposed use is a referral-based medical care facility and not a homeless shelter. There's misconception and misdirection of who the clients are. The biggest concern seems to be with who they are. We do not see opposition to the client base more than the business that will provide needed community service. The focus has been on who the care recipients are instead of the actual use and business. The care recipients are being falsely portrayed as crime-ridden, drug-addicted, undesirable, homeless vagrants with a mission to populate and destroy the local community. Care recipients do just not walk-ins taken off the street. They're already in the care system and referred to the facility. This is not just a crash pad for them to stay at night and go out during the day. Who they are that the community seems so afraid of. They're people who need understanding, compassion, and assistance. Family, somebody's child, brothers, sisters, parents, veterans, someone you may know. They have issues and needs that this facility will help take care of. Oh, running out of time. My goodness. Misdirection. Projecting existing community problems on this CUP is not an excuse for dismissal. Unfortunately, there's already existing problems with gang, crime, and drug dealing. The existing community problems were not created by this CUP. The misconception of demonizing the care recipients exasperating this problem is unsupported false narrative scare tactics. There is no valid argument. This is not the business model. This is not an emergency shelter. It's an inpatient healthcare facility. It's a professional, legal, and legitimate operation. All care recipients are vetted in advance. We do not provide emergency care services. There's 24/7 medical staff, security is on site. This is not a lockdown facility. They're not in a correctional state. They do have the ability to leave during the day to attend needed appointments, take care of personal business, meet with family. And go over the 5 findings. The establishment maintains the operation of the conditional use will not be detrimental. The applicant suggests the use will increase homelessness, crime, and drug use and be detrimental to the neighborhood. This is not addressing the business being addressed, but the business clients. The applicant has not proven a valid standing to support projected problems stemming directly from the CUP. The conditional use, number 2, will be injurious to the enjoyment of property of the vicinity. Similar to number 1, the appellant has not shown valid injury to the use of other properties. The appellant openly states that the appeal allowing the proposal will prevent new housing. There is an ulterior motive for this approach. The housing developer YellowTree is part of the appeal group. YellowTree has approached the building owner to purchase the property for redevelopment. The developer has a vested interest in killing the CUP and seeing this project fail. They are stroking NIMBY, not in my backyards, for misinformation, using neighborhood opposition to do their dirty work. Number 3, sufficient support in the neighborhood.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Your time is up.
Okay.
Now,
I would ask that you finish reading this
appreciate it.
to understand the full response. Unfortunately, 5 minutes wasn't enough to respond to everything that they had to say.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And next, I will allow anyone who sign up for 2 minutes. I'll ask you to keep your remarks focused on the specific conditional use permit, and I'll ask you to be respectful and stay decorum. So, our first speaker is Brian Walter. Oh, he already speak. So, let me see here.
Chair Osmond?
Yes.
Everyone has spoken that is signed up except for Lydia Millard.
Okay, thank you. Lydia, welcome.
Hello, Council. My name is Lydia Millard. I am the new Executive Director for Stevens Square, Loring Heights. I started this position on August 1st, and upon my position, one of the board members of Stevens Square, which is Maureen Wells, found out about this business proposal. The business itself did not reach out to the community. We reached out to them to set up a community meeting on August 5th. On that meeting, we found that there was a lot of gaps and loopholes within their proposal. And at that time, at the meeting, they stated that they would not move forward with the conditional use permit for the Planning Commission meeting that happened on the 12th. We showed up to that meeting anyways, just to make sure. And at that meeting, they presented that they were ready and met all of the requirements of the criteria along with their application. They were granted that approval. We did have to set up another community meeting with them that was actually supposed to take place yesterday. We had a list of community conditions that we wanted to be addressed that wasn't addressed for that August 12th meeting, and the meeting yesterday was canceled. The applicant never agreed to take on the meeting. The applicant never agreed to reschedule the meeting. So we had set up the meeting with no input of whether or not the applicant would show up until the day of. And so coming from the community where this business is looking to be established, the integrity is not there. The trust is not there. Even though the mission of the company is valuable and it is needed, the locations that they have looked at and researched has not been thorough. They've only looked at one other location, which is in Bloomington, for their lease, and there are plenty of commercial spaces that are available outside of our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next person is Mike.
Council members, Mike Finkelstein. I'm the managing partner of the building at 1911 Nicollet Avenue, which is just one block to the south. So I spoke at the public hearing, the Planning Commission's public hearing last time around. There's too much to say in too little time. I will just make a couple of very brief comments. The use, one, and these are all kind of at a macro level, the use clearly does not offer any benefit whatsoever to the corridor, to the residents or the businesses. None. Like, no one from the neighborhood, the community, is going to go to the shelter and purchase a service or a product. That's number one. The corridor, the commercial corridor, is meant to be and has always been to be, and with tremendous effort, to continue to transform it into a livable corridor. Retail services, commercial services, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think we all know what I'm talking about there. This has no influence on that whatsoever. The use has zero influence. 18th to 19th, for the last 4.5 years, is a known drug haven. It's no secret. We're in the 5th precinct. We are the number 1 rated worst intersection in the city, in the entire city, in the 5th precinct. So out of 4 neighborhoods in the city, call it 5, including the north side, we're in that top 5.
Thank you, Mike.
There is zero.
Please wrap it up.
Benefit to that problem by having the use on Nicollet at this location at 1801 Nicollet.
Thank you for
It's not brain surgery. I mean, it's a fact. It is what it is.
Thank you for your testimony.
Okay.
Next person is April Kelly. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is April Kelly. I am an employee of the Stevens Square neighborhood for over 20 years. I was also a former resident of the area. And I just wanted to voice my concerns to oppose the conditional use permit for a proposed emergency shelter at 1801 Nicollet Avenue. While I believe that Minneapolis needs an answer to help the growing population of unhoused people in our communities, this simply is not a great fit. The location that Accord Health Services is seeking for the emergency shelter is not an appropriate location for such services. Already an area hit heavily with crime, gang activity, and open drug use, the facility is not properly equipped or staffed to manage the demographics of our area. We have already experienced how an emergency shelter would impact this area when the city of Minneapolis repurposed the Millennium Hotel back in 2021. It is easy to make decisions about a community without knowing truly what is best, but I urge you as an employee and former resident of the neighborhood to consider a walk on 18th and Nicollet and ask yourself, do I feel comfortable here? Please consider this permit in a different location outside of a community that is already exhausted by its challenges while clinging on to the hope that maybe this is what's necessary to move us forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there anyone who would like to speak on this item? Sir, you already have spoken.
Mr. Chair, the last comment.
No, the comments are closed. You can write a comment and give it to the. Thank you. All right. I'm going to close the public hearing, and now we are using speaker management. If anyone would like to make a comment, but I do have a couple questions with the staff. First question is the applicant repeatedly say that this is not shelter use. How do we get to the conclusion that this is emergency shelter category? And also, some of the residents in appellant have mentioned that that we should oppose interim use permit instead of conditional use permit. What is the role on that, and what do we play on that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Osman, members of the committee. So there are only a few congregate living type uses in the zoning code. And I believe this came up last time as well, that DHS is always creating new license types, and some of those license types have come into being after even the recent zoning code changes that happened last year. So it is up to the zoning administrator to determine how we define different uses in the zoning code. And this type of thing is happening every single day. So we look at a use, we determine what is it most similar to, and for congregate living type uses and shelters, there are 3 distinct categories. There's an overnight shelter, which is like a typical shelter where folks are checking in at night and checking out during the day. There is an emergency shelter, which is somewhere that someone might stay for 24 hours up until 6 months. And then there's a state credentialed care facility, which is a place where someone may stay in a congregate living facility for 6 months or more. And given the nature of this use, it's a temporary living. It's focused on folks who are unhoused or homeless. Yes, it does have this medical piece, but there's no definition in the zoning code that's closer than an emergency shelter. So that's how it was determined that this was an emergency shelter. And then the question about whether an interim use permit or conditional use permit is more appropriate, staff has given the applicant 2 different opportunities at different points along the process to offer them the opportunity to withdraw their conditional use permit application and resubmit an interim use permit application. The applicant declined to do that, and that is within the right. We are subject to Minnesota Statute 15.99 that we have to respond to the application that is submitted before us. So the applicant has submitted a conditional use permit. They feel confident that they want the permanent approval that comes with a conditional use permit, and they have declined on the opportunities that staff has given them to withdraw and consider an interim use permit instead.
I understand the interim use permit is 5 years long, or is it what the applicant decide or what the staff decide? What is
the maximum?
Interim use? Yep.
Yeah, the maximum period of an interim use permit would be 5 years.
5 years.
The approval window for an interim use permit can be shorter, but the maximum would be 5.
Okay, thank you. That's all the question I have, but I do want to make comments on this. This is located in Ward 6, and we are looking at the facts of what's in front of us. This is quasi-judicial. So now, I appreciate everyone who came through to speak. I have spoken both the residents and also the applicant. I think some of the things that have been mentioned here, the struggle of this neighborhood and this section is fact. And also at the same time, the unhoused folks and the crisis we have is also real. So I would like to make the motion to continue this item for next cycle. With that, I will have my council members here in the committee to make their comments on this or ask any question for the staff. Councilmember Cashman.
Thank you, Councilmember Osman. I would like to ask Attorney Fussy if you can explain what continuing this item for a cycle means in the context of a quasi-judicial hearing and what the limitations are to our actions during this period.
Through the chair, Councilmember Cashman, certainly it's within the authority of this committee to have the public hearing closed and to continue it one cycle. I understand we're within the time frames that are you were required to make a decision, so that is not an issue. The only issue, or the big issue that would be out there, would be that it's still a pending quasi-judicial matter, and so the committee members or the council members wouldn't be able to be involved in ex parte communications directly with the parties to this matter. Certainly, if it's your intention, you could encourage that the applicant, for instance, have further contacts or further meetings or further communications, and it's possible that you could get a report back from what was said or what was what occurred or transpired in those meetings, but there would be a prohibition through the quasi-judicial function of council members engaging in direct ex parte communication with the parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Fussy. I think I will try to explain that to my neighbors who are here today in non-legal terms. Is just that Councilmember Osmond and I both very much want the applicant to have more conversations with the neighborhood and to look at the conditions that are being proposed and see what solutions can come out of it. Just that Councilmember Osmond and I would not be able to be in those meetings with you. And we'd be happy to hear about what comes out of it and what actions we could take 2 weeks from now, when this would be back up for a vote, which would be our last opportunity to take action, given the time restraint on taking action on this application. It has to be done 2 weeks from now. So there is a deadline, there's a crunch time. And I'll support his motion to continue this for a cycle.
Thank you, Councilmember Cashman. Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Osmond. This question is for staff. And I'm curious, are there plans from the zoning administrator to address this issue? This is a new license type from DHS. I anticipate we will likely see more applicants, and then subsequently we will be calling it an emergency shelter, which seems to be at the heart of the challenge with both the applicants that we are discussing today.
Chair Osmond, Councilmember Jenkins, thank you for that question. So the state has a number of license types that refer to various types of activities related to assisted facilities, right? So residential care facilities, and there's a spectrum of care that occurs. Our former zoning code attempted to classify those based on the type of licenses or the license names in the state. And what we found was that it was really difficult to keep up with the changing landscape. And so when we adopted our new zoning code, we really tried to move away from naming specific use types and went to use categories. And so in terms of the definition of emergency shelter, this squarely fits within that definition. I think certainly we could discuss about whether the name of that category is correct or not in terms of describing what it is. But in terms of the legal definition, I think we are not concerned that this has been misclassified or that if we had a different zoning classification, the outcome would be any different. I think policy direction has been to broadly allow these types of facilities throughout the city, and that has been the direction. So while this is a new license type within the umbrella of assisted facilities that the county and the state offer, I think generally speaking, it's in line with the intent of the ordinance and fits within the classification of that definition.
Yeah, I anticipate that whatever community a entrepreneur decides to locate their business, we're going to have the same challenges.
Councilmember Cashman.
Thank you, Chair Osmond. Meg, I do have one more question for you, Director McMahon. Did the Department of Health Services provide any guidance about these new license type, about what type of zoning is ideal for location of these facilities?
Chair Osmond, Councilmember Cashman, no, I think when we when the state or the county is working through this, I think zoning is probably the furthest thing from their mind or near to. So they're looking at it purely from a public health perspective, what the licensing criteria are related to, the professional credentials of the folks on site and how many people and how, the kind of the operation of that facility. And they really leave it up to local control in terms of where those facilities can be sited. Mm-hmm. And so when we look to our Minneapolis 2040 plan and and then the subsequent zoning that came out of that, the policy direction from council was to allow really the category of assisted living facilities, which this falls under relatively broadly within the city. So emergency shelters are permitted use in all zoning districts. There is some additional regulations that go along with that in terms of performance standards, hence the requirement for the conditional use permit, but they are permitted.
Thank you for that explanation. Do we have a history of doing any proactive site searching for shelters, as in the city actually identifies locations where shelters should be and then puts that out to providers as options?
I guess since you're looking over in this direction, Chair Osmond, Councilmember Cashman, we do site selections for businesses from time to time. We do not do site selections for shelters. They come to us looking for where they want to be.
Okay, thank you. I do think that the city and the county should together collaborate more on identifying sites for shelters. There's a huge need in our community. I mean, you saw the council rearrange our budget last week to find $1.5 million to keep an agate shelter open because there is such a need for shelters in our community, and the siting is always very difficult because of all the conditions in the neighborhood and the way of trying to get folks into that facility and for emergency vehicles, et cetera. So I just think that the city and the county should try to be more proactive in working together to identify. I mean, there are a lot of vacant buildings in our community that could be ID'd for that.
Councilmember Chowdhury.
Thank you, Chair Osmond. I did want to ask a question of Accord Health in this public forum to avoid any ex parte communication, just about a clear understanding on a point that was made by them on coordinating transportation once a patient is done at the facility. The applicant stated in their comments, they're like, people are just going to be put out into the streets, and that doesn't appear to be the truth in what we're hearing. So a better understanding of what that process looks like in terms of patients leaving the facility.
So the patient leaving the facility, the coordination starts from admission. We do have a system where as soon as someone is admitted, we start talking about where they're going to go from there, because one of our goals is not to dismiss you into the streets. We need you to find permanent housing. So one of the things we're doing is we're trying to figure out, do you have, let's say, mental health issues? Because some of our people on the streets do have, that's a prevalent situation. If that's the case, we know so many places where you could be rerouted to, maybe like an arts facility, intensive residential treatment center. Could it be a group home where you need to be? I happen to know it's tens, if not hundreds, of group homes that are shutting down because they don't have clients. Those are places we can channel patients to. We could be a referral point for those places. Even just getting them in touch with case management, where someone in case management is following up with these patients or these guys on the street to figure out where they're going to go next. There's also a Minnesota Department of Health housing service that we're also applying for, where we will be able to apply for housing for these patients, for these people. Other than that, if they come in and choose not to partake in all of the above, we do have transportation to transport them to their point of first contact or familiar place where they started. Because most of them are not looking for a new place to camp out. They usually have places where they are, where they have families and friends, where they're familiar with. Those are places where we would be sending them back to.
Thank you. Through the chair, if it's all right. In terms of the people who are patients that are your clients, how are they usually referred? Is it usually through Hennepin County? Is it through the state? Like, what's
All
their
of the
touch
above.
point?
It's through Hennepin County, state, clinics, physicians from the hospital. Most of them are coming from doctors where they're sick and they need some help. They cannot recuperate from the street. A lot of them are suffering from, let's say, HIV. They have TB. They have different things where they need to recuperate. Like somebody who has, let's say, TB, they go to the hospital. That's where they would be treated to begin with to get rid of it. But there's a huge amount of time needed to recuperate from that, where they're not infectious or a threat. They don't have communicable disease threats anymore, but need to recuperate somewhere where it's warmer, let's say in December. They cannot do well on the streets because they go back to the street 1 week later, they're back in the hospital or dead.
Thank you. I asked that question just to kind of get an understanding of how individuals that are clients of yours are already within the continuum of care, right? They are already actively seeking out and accepting services.
Correct.
And then the service provider that is charged with Health and Human Services for us in the city of Minneapolis is Hennepin County. So these are individuals that have already been offered different types of services, accepted them, and are kind of moving through the continuum of care process.
Correct.
And just for the public record, right, like when we're talking about individuals who are unhoused in encampments, they're oftentimes at the very starting point of the continuum of care. They may have been offered services, maybe accepted some, or maybe they're getting assessed, or maybe it's taking longer and multiple touches for them to accept a service. And so the client base we're talking about are individuals already participating, moving through continuum of care, and then there sounds like a goal of getting people to the next step of housing through this coordinated work with Hennepin County. So I just kind of wanted to get a better picture of this specific base of individuals. So thank you for answering those questions.
Thank you. Seeing no one else to speak, with my motion to delay this item and continue this item, all those in favor say aye.
Excuse me, Chair, I just have one last question for the applicant.
Okay.
Are you currently operational? Are you doing business now?
Or just in general? Like any other sites? Okay.
Yeah. Do you have other sites that you're operating now?
I actually have a group home that I operate. It's very different from what we're talking about right now. But
so this is a new endeavor.
I'm sorry, what?
This is a new endeavor?
Yes, it is. But similar in a way that these people are going to need medical care, nursing care, which we're already doing, which I do. We take care, and I've taken care of a lot of people in the group homes where I work, where we've taken in a lot of homeless people. So I imagine it's not going to be any different.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Now, with that motion to continue this item for next cycle, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and the motion carries.